Welcome back to the VandySports podcast. Alongside Joey Dwyer, I am Billy Derrick, and we are here to recap Vanderbilt's season-ending loss to High Point, 10-9. The Panthers walk it off and end the Commodores' season in a regional for the third straight season, which obviously is rare air under a Tim Corbin coach program. But first, before we get into everything and recap the season and honestly the athletic season that was or wasn't at Vanderbilt, we will get to the Wash House. Wash House is actually, Joey, Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company. My bad. We'll get to the Wash House here in a second too as well. But Murfreesboro Pure Milk Company, they're a family-owned third-generation milk and ice cream distribution company located in Murfreesboro. A partnership began over 50 years ago with Purity Dairy in Nashville to provide purity milk and ice cream to consumers in Middle Tennessee. They now serve Southern Kentucky, Northern Alabama, Chattanooga, and North Georgia. For more info, visit their website at mpmci.com. Also, Wash House, they are our sponsor for basketball season, and we'll talk a little bit. We're going to encompass everything basically here, the athletic year that was at Vanderbilt. Are you dreading laundry day? Is it stealing time to do the things that you truly enjoy? Let the professionals at the Wash House take care of that for you. They've got 2 convenient locations in Nashville. Just drop off your dirty laundry, and their professional attendants can give you back the one thing you can never have enough of, your time. Within 24 hours, you can pick up your nicely folded, fresh and clean laundry ready to be put away. Log on to washhouseclean.com or stop in today and get your time back. Joey, High Point knocks off Vanderbilt 10-9 in one of the crazier games that I have seen in a long time. Probably the craziest game of the season for Vanderbilt. I mean, obviously the postseason, they didn't have too many games quite like this, Joey, where they get down 9-5, I think it was, and then the next inning they tie it at 9. But I thought it was big they couldn't take the lead. I felt like they, you had a chance in the ninth to take the lead, but I thought it would have been big, obviously, for them to be able to take the lead. But even to tie it, I thought was big. Jack Bulger came up with a big hit there. But at the end of the day, Joey, fitting end to a season that was extremely disappointing for a program with high standards, high expectations, and now it's 3 straight years where Tim Corbin's program has lost in a regional, hasn't gotten out of a regional. They haven't been to a super since 2021 when they got all the way to the College World Series final series. But Joey, we'll start with today. What did you see, and how does this sort of help encompass everything that happened for Vanderbilt baseball this season?
Well, the biggest thing I saw was a low point for Vanderbilt baseball. I can't even think of a loss of that magnitude for this program. And what I also saw was a team that lost its confidence and swagger once it went down, and had a nice rally there in the 8th. But you look at it and they just completely seemed startled. They seemed rattled once High Point started to make that run midway through the game. Billy, I don't know that a lot of Tim Corbin teams have had that happen as often as this team did. It felt like they lost their confidence, they lost their swagger. And I think that's kind of a microcosm of the issues around this team. They never seem to have an alpha outside of J.D. Thompson for a few weeks. Maybe a couple other guys stepped up. R.J. Austin, really good today. Really good throughout the whole year. I think he had a really underrated year. But Vanderbilt just didn't seem to have the it factor that it needed to have. It just kind of felt like a bland team, a team that was kind of stale, a product that was kind of stale, a style of play that was kind of stale. And they're going to have to fix that, Billy. There has to be some form of change this offseason. There's a lot of things we can get to talk about that, but you can't run this back next year with the group that they're going to have next year and expect that they're going to be awesome or they're going to have a different result next year. This has to change in some way, and I think today kind of told you that. Today should be a day that shows you where this team was flawed, and I think we always knew this team was flawed, right? Like, even when they made the run in the SEC tournament, we were thinking that's about the level of play that they're going to have to play at to actually make a run in a regional. And we weren't sure that was going to happen. We thought maybe they could unlock it a little bit, but that was always maybe hoping for something that we didn't have evidence of. Now they've got to fix those flaws. It can't be the same thing year after year. There has to be some buzz, some excitement around the product they're putting on the field. And this year, for as great as Tim Corbin is, I don't think we saw a lot of that. I think this team just had so many flaws, and they all came to light today, particularly in the mindset area and in the confidence, swagger, attitude area. And I think that was evident today.
Yeah, we'll talk a lot about what this offseason could and should probably look like for this baseball program probably a little bit later. But, Joey, I want to hit on today's game and how I thought it was a microcosm of the season in a weird way. Like, and if they would have come back and won it, I probably still would have said the same thing. But, because they lost, it was even more fitting. This team just came up short time and time again. And today was, it wasn't an SEC opponent. You weren't at High Points Place. This was a neutral site. It was a smaller crowd, and so you saw the makings of a potential disaster today. And this wasn't a disaster like it was yesterday against Coastal Carolina, but I mean, it sure looked that way when it's 9-5. And yeah, they battled back, but you come up short. And that's just that taste today was the season in a nutshell. The taste that fans and players and coaches have in their mouths right now is basically what the entire season has felt like. And for this fan base and for anyone associated. And I thought, Joey, when they did come back, because we've seen this team, the issue hasn't been heart or toughness or compete level or any of that, right? I mean, the kids, they love to go, they love to play baseball. They love getting out there and playing. The want to was there, but the want to never connected with the talent. And obviously we know they have some talent with a couple of pitchers in Cunningham and Carter. You got some young talent with RJ Austin, and some of those guys will be back, but it never connected with their want to. And I thought today was an indicator of the season and the injuries too. For the injuries to continue to pile up, you don't have two of your better hitters, your two best hitters this year, statistically, at least power wise. Espinal and Vastine didn't play today. I mean, how does that happen? How does that happen? Did we expect that to happen? No. Vastine was at the hotel sick. Davis Diaz wasn't 100%. Espinal, of course, got banged up today. And so it was just a microcosm today with whether it was injuries, whether it was them battling back but not being able to get all the way to the finish line. It was just a perfect microcosm, I thought, of the season. And I do want to get to the offseason, but today was not stunning, but I am still very surprised they weren't able to get by a High Point team. And I texted you this at the beginning of the game, Joey. High Point, to me, eye test wise, didn't look like a team that Vanderbilt couldn't or shouldn't handle or overpower. And they were never able to do that. Credit to High Point, right? That's a good offensive team. But pitching wise, Vanderbilt should be able to overpower a team like that, and they didn't. And I think that was another telling sign that the bats, I think, are most of the story this year. I think pitching wise, obviously there were concerns, right? We know about the pitching concerns, but offensively, you just never saw enough. And I know they scored 9 runs today, Joey, but when you're not able to overpower and sort of wear down a High Point team the way I think we've sort of expected, that was another telling sign that this team has fallen behind and things have to change.
Yeah, I think there was some responsiveness late in the game today, but I think today was an overall summation of their lack of responsiveness throughout the year. I really got concerned about that at Georgia when Tim Corbin challenged them on that Friday night, and I've referenced this a few times throughout the year. He challenged them that Friday night and said, "This is on you guys," things like that, almost challenged their competitiveness in a way. And then they go out the next day, and I think they got run ruled. That was kind of when I thought that this thing could be in some real trouble. And that was kind of when it started to really go downhill. And they responded a few times. They responded at Kentucky, like we had mentioned. Tennessee on the last day, they responded. But outside of J.D. Thompson's start days, this team just never really responded. And a lot of the time in the big moment outside of the SEC tournament, didn't respond there either. It just felt like there were so many things wrong with this team, but it's kind of easy to pinpoint some bigger picture things like that. I think they just didn't have enough power. They didn't have enough star power. And we mentioned that they didn't have any all-SEC guys. I mean, their pitchers were good, really struggled on the road, though. And their hitters, good, only had 2 guys in double-digit homers, right? So there's just a lot wrong with this that has to be fixed. And they're not an awful program, right? Like, this is not Vandy basketball from last year we're talking about. This is a program that found a way in the NCAA tournament, and continue the regional streak, right? That's something worth noting. That's something that's pretty special that they've been able to keep that streak going. But just getting into the tournament isn't the standard for this program. And I think we know that, and I think they know that. And as a result, there has to be something that gives here.
Yeah, you can't let that slip anymore. I think is where we're at. If it slips even further, then more damage is done. And I think we know what could potentially happen there. But you're right about the state of this program. This program is not dead. I mean, this program is not lifeless. I mean, at times it feels like that, and certainly our board could tell you that as well. But I mean, last year you won the SEC tournament, which a lot of people say is harder to win than the national title. So they're coming off a year where they won the SEC tournament. They hosted a regional last year. Let's not forget. And this year we saw some big time injuries to Chris Maldonado. We saw injuries throughout the year, whether it was Jaden Davis, Jack Bolger. Just felt like this team never fully gelled together. They never clicked. They never clicked as a unit that we might have thought. And I think coming into the season, we thought this team had potential to be in Omaha, but the margin was smaller for this team than it was last year, I think. And that margin almost, Joey, felt like it got smaller and smaller as the season went on. And, when things went wrong, there you didn't see a ton of resiliency. I mean, today you did, right? To come down 9-5, come back after being down 9-5. They got into the tournament, and extended the 18-year streak of regionals, but you just didn't see enough resiliency. You didn't see that alpha energy from enough guys. I mean, I thought at times you saw it from RJ Austin, but really even the pitching staff. I mean, Cunningham pitched really well most of the year, right? I mean, he gave this team a chance when he was on the mound. Carter Holton, of course, banged up and kind of been the story of his career, as unfortunate as that is. Pitched well, I thought, today, but as a closer, he was not the starter that you expected him to be. And offensively, we know about their struggles. That was the thing, Joey, that never really changed. Like before the year, we said this team's going to struggle power wise, right? That this team is not going to be able to hit the ball to the ballpark like other SEC teams, but the pitching will give them a chance. I think the pitching was less dominant than we thought it could have been coming into the season, but the bats, for me, never really changed. I mean, they had some good outings, right? A lot of those game threes, whether it was Kentucky, I know they beat Tennessee 3-0, and they proved they could score in bunches at times this year, but on the whole, it wasn't enough. And I think that's my biggest takeaway, Joey, offensively. I think pitching wise, I don't have a ton of concerns. I mean, there are some concerns there, but if nothing changes offensively with whether it's the approach, the players you're bringing in, the level of power that you have or don't have, if none of that changes, then I think this program could be in some real danger, because you're in the SEC, you've got Oklahoma and Texas coming in. The bats. I look at the bats, Joey. If an approach doesn't change, or if you're not bringing in some impact portal players who can hit the ball out of the ballpark, I think that's where this program could get in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, I think the margin for error was small all year offensively, and that's not just because of injuries. I think injuries were a part of the story of this team, but they were not anywhere near the defining thing, right? Like Maldonado would have made an impact. Vastine today would have made an impact, I'm sure. But again, I just don't think that the injuries were the thing that defined this team. I think they hurt, but there was so much else wrong with their offense. They had a lot of guys who I thought needed to step into bigger roles, and a lot of those guys weren't guys that I think nationally or even locally people thought could step into bigger roles, and that was an issue, right? Like maybe Davis Diaz was a guy who could have taken a bigger leap but didn't. But there were a lot of other guys who I think they had to rely on to take leaps, who feasibly probably were not going to take leaps offensively, and they had to be dang near perfect to be good enough offensively to compete with teams, and their blueprint's different. They're going to have to hit for less homers than other teams. We knew that all year, but they just didn't have enough guys that could consistently put together good at-bats and get on base, and it felt like their offense wasn't very receptive of each other in some way. Like when they were all kind of going, everybody was going, right? But when nobody was going, it was just RJ Austin, and there was nobody to bail him out other than RJ Austin. it was just a lineup-wide struggle whenever the lineup faced a tough pitcher or got down on itself. Tim Corbin talked a lot about this year, and more than I've seen him in the past, about, well, we feel good about ourselves after that, right? It felt like for a lot of the year, the offense didn't feel very good about itself. And I think they need more leadership. I think they need more guys who are older. And I think they have some really good young talent. I think R.J. Austin's a guy that probably going to be an all-SEC guy next year, you would think. Braden Holcomb, I think, could take a step. Kojal, I think, could take a step. Maybe Barcy could as well. Big homer out of him today to hit 2 postseason homers. But they've got to get some more power in the portal, first of all. They've got to get some more experience, and they've got to get leadership offensively. Their margin for error was so small. I think we knew that all season. They had to be dang near perfect to beat a team like Tennessee offensively, unless J.D. Thompson gave him something great or Bryce Cunningham gave him something great. But offensively, back to square one. And pitching staff, almost the same thing. They're going to lose Cunningham and Holton to the draft, I would assume. I wonder if they get Futrell back. I don't know. Thompson will be the Friday night guy, but they got a lot of young relievers. They need some experience in the bullpen as well. There's a lot of questions around this offseason, but we know offensively especially, something's got to give. It's got to be a difference of approach, right? It's got to be better development of guys. It's got to be a different blueprint of recruit that they're trying to get at some points. It's got to be more of a reliance on the portal than high school at times. And I'm not saying they need to stop recruiting high school guys because they've had some real success doing that, but they've got to maybe divvy their numbers up a little bit differently, focus on how they develop a little bit differently. Something has to give, right? It's not just short-term lineup fixes that were the problem this season. It's bigger picture things that you could see coming from day one.
Yeah, only 2 guys hitting double-digit home runs is really not going to cut it in today's day and age of college baseball. And those 2 guys, Vastine and Espinal, didn't even play today. So,
I mean, look at when they play in a park like Clemson, it felt like they had no chance, right? When they went to Athens, it felt like they had no chance. If they would have gone to Lindsey Nelson this year, it felt like it would have had no chance unless they got unbelievable pitching outings. And the pitching on the road was really poor, which is also something they're going to have to figure out. That was a staff-wide thing, not just a Bryce Cunningham thing, not just a Carter Holton thing. It's interesting just how drastic some of these things were. Because normally you'll say, oh, it's a bad matchup for them. This year, if you look at some of the matchups, it's like, oh, they can't win that game. And I don't know if I felt like that about many teams before.
Yeah. And, you only have 3 guys hitting in 300, Matthew Polk, R.J. Austin, and Jaden Davis. And I think the good news, that all 3 of those guys should be back next year. We'll see about Jonathan Vastine. I think he's a draftable guy, so he'll probably – Yeah. And then Espinal is a senior, so he'll be gone. Cam Koj will be back next year. You would think at one of those infield positions, maybe DH potentially. Troy Leneve and Davis Diaz are 2 veterans that I look at, and it just never really panned out this year. I mean, and you look at Leneve, right? He battled injuries throughout his career, but I think coming into this year, he was a key for me, right? I think he was a guy that had to at least be in double-digit home runs, hitting 268. It's not rock bottom, but you'd like for that average to be a little bit better as a 5th-year senior, right? And so Leneve just that's not going to cut it. And then Davis Diaz to hit around 250 as a junior, as one of the veteran leaders on this team, not going to cut it either. You look at an older guy like a J.D. Rogers, who, skill-wise, obviously is not up there, but didn't get a ton of playing time this year. So there aren't a ton of upperclassmen on this team, Joey. I mean, that's what I look at, that at least had huge roles. I mean, you had some older guys like Calvin Hewitt, who kind of got hot there at the end of the season. You needed more than that from him, though. I mean, for this team to do what we thought they could do. Jack Bolger, another guy, and battled an injury, I know, and really kind of started playing better in the postseason here. But again, another guy that you probably could have expected a better year, a better career. Braden Holcomb, who's a freshman, he'll be back next year, of course. You just start to look up and down this roster, and you start to wonder, what's the future of this team, of this program, right? And I can't stop thinking about potential older portal players that you can bring in and be immediate impacts. And if that doesn't happen, Joey, I don't think next year will be much different than this year. I think.
Yeah. They need an RJ Shrek. Or 2
yeah.
or 3.
Yeah. I mean, I know they got Jaden Davis this year, and he was a great pickup, and he'll be. I expect big things from Jaden Davis next year and in the future. But Jacob Humphrey, you also got from UMass Lowell. He's not. I thought he played a decent role this year on the team, but I don't think that's the model, right? I think you need to find an older guy that would fit at Vanderbilt academically, that would fit within your culture, who has hit, a good amount of home runs in his career, or at least 10, 15 home runs last season. And I'm actually going to probably try to put a little big board up of some portal bats that I think Vanderbilt could try to go at and could get potentially. And I think hopefully fans would like that. And I think that's what has to happen. I can't think of anything else because, like you said, Joey, this program needs a jolt of new ideas. This program needs some outside energy from somebody else, whether it's a coach, a player. I mean, all it takes is, especially in baseball, we talk about in basketball, all it takes is 2 or 3 guys. I think it's similar in baseball. You get a couple, 3, 4 bats out of the portal, all of a sudden your team mindset will shift. The upperclassmen this season, we're not going to cut it. And I think before the season, I think we knew there was a shot that the upperclassmen you had were not going to cut it. You had to rely on your freshmen. I think that's the good thing here, Joey. The silver lining here is that, like you mentioned, they do have some young freshmen that are really good players. I mean, there's a lot of good freshmen on this team. And if they stick with Vanderbilt, I think the future is bright for them. We got a couple of good sophomores as well. Some more freshmen coming in next year, of course, but you got to get older. And in today's day and age, you can get old fast. We saw it in basketball. And that's the decision this program has to make, specifically Tim Corbin. And we'll see if they do it. But if I think there's levels to this, right, Joey? If they go out and in the offseason and get 10 transfers, a few of them pitchers, a lot of bats, I think fans will be excited. But if they go out and get 4 or 5 guys, maybe a couple of pitchers and a few bats, I don't know. But again, you don't know how these guys are going to pan out either, right? So that's the other thing. You could get some portal bats. Do they end up fitting your culture? I think that's probably what this program is weary of, and I don't blame them. But at this point, I don't know of any other fix.
Yeah, and they had guys who they targeted that were huge upper level guys last year, and they just missed on those. So maybe it's not they have to change the whole mentality of it. Maybe they just have to make their pitch a little bit sweeter. Maybe they just have to find the right guys or get a break here or there in the portal that they didn't get last year. But they've got to perform a little bit better in the portal than they did last year. They've got to have more guys that make impacts, right? They got 4 guys this year. Sawyer Hawks, I think you kind of write off because he was hurt, but he wasn't great when he pitched. Levi Huseman, I think, is a guy that was more of a project than maybe people realized. Jaden Davis, I think, exceeded a lot of expectations. Jacob Humphrey probably did not exceed a lot of expectations. So you got one guy out of that 4-man portal class that really helped you. And I think they have enough coming back to where if they supplement it with a few good portal guys that they have a chance to get back to the level that this program has been at. But I don't know that they can run back what they have without that and expect to be a really good team, especially in the bullpen where I just thought they had so many unreliable options. And a lot of those were freshmen. Maybe they'll be more reliable next year. But they've got to get older there. They probably need maybe another starter out of the portal. And then they got to supplement what they have in the lineup with a few portal guys. And they can't rely on guys who haven't made leaps throughout a lot of their career, more than just a freshman and sophomore year. Guys who have played 4 years and still haven't made a leap. They can't rely on guys like that to make a leap again, right? They've got to do something differently. And I think maybe that doesn't mean they got to take 10 guys in the portal, but they've got to take a few, and they've got to make sure that those guys are impactful and are fits. And
I lost your audio. Still lost. Still can't hear you. I think you're back now.
Billy, it's a low point, and they've got to figure something out in the portal. That was my point.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we've kind of hammered that down, and so I think at this point, Joey, let's recap this athletic year. The football team goes 2-10. The
Billy,
basketball
I sent you a picture early of us after the Presbyterian game. I think that sums it up well. I was just staring at the camera like this, and you were dazing off somewhere.
It was just lifeless.
Lifeless. That's what Vanderbilt athletics was this year, right? Lifeless. I mean,
Yeah.
we're pretty positive guys, right? There's
Mm-hmm.
not a whole lot to take from this year outside of maybe, obviously, the baseball program is never going to be awful. The basketball program seems to be trending upward. They got maybe some fixes, bigger picture, but Billy, if you look at the last year, what a freaking nightmare for this athletic department.
And I think what I want to hit on is for this athletic department, Candace Lee's office, Dearmeyer working together with the coaches, whether it's Clark Lee, Byington, Tim Corbin. Does this get better, right? We start with football. I mean, obviously you can't go 2-10 again. Do you have to go to a bowl game? I don't know that you have to, but you gotta look better than you did last year. Basketball is going to be better. I mean, I think we're convinced basketball will be better. How much better, I don't know. Baseball is oddly, Joey, a question mark. I mean, I'm at the point now with baseball where I don't know. I mean, because I think there's so many big decisions to make in this offseason that it could really turn. I mean, Joey, I don't want to bring this up, but I mean, what if out of the blue, Tim Corbin announces a retirement? I mean, I'm not saying that would happen, and I'm not sitting here saying I think it could happen because I don't think it's going to happen. But that's kind of the realm here. Like, there's some big decisions to be made, right? And so, how do you look at this athletic department right now, and how can the three sports get better? And do you expect these three sports to get better?
I think the athletic department kind of dug itself a hole with being behind on NIL and such early on, and Chris has documented that for a long time. I think they might be in a better place, though. And that's crazy to say after this school year, but seeing what they did with the basketball roster and how they completely were able to flip it and how they were able to make a hire after a good process, I think that's probably a positive sign. Football with the NIL moving forward, I think probably a good sign. The basketball facility's opening. Construction will probably be done after the season for football. I think they've got a chance to maybe be on the upward, and it's hard to not be on the upward after a year like this, but I think this might have been a real wake-up call for them that they can't operate the way that they had been operating. And I think just looking at it, they were behind the curve on so much, as Chris has documented, and that cost them this year, especially when everybody else was a step ahead of them. They were a step behind, and they didn't give their guys as much of a chance as they should have, from the players to some coaches. Maybe they didn't give enough of a chance to, and that's not a defense of Jerry Stackhouse or Clark Lee, because they certainly could have done a lot better. But now I think their guys were supported a little bit more, especially Clark Lee, as opposed to a year ago. I think is supported a lot more. And I have some optimism. Maybe it can turn a little bit more positively. But this year was them paying for a lot of, I don't want to use the word negligence, but a lot of oversight on some things that were going to be issues that I don't know if they fully expected to be or weren't prepared enough for it to be, or they didn't have a solution at that point. Now they've got to have solutions, and I think that will define what this department is next school year. This school year, outside of women's basketball, I think, Billy, I don't know, what a brutal year. I will say, though, in terms of each individual sport, I think men's and women's basketball are set up about as well as they could be to have sustainable success in the future, especially if Mark Byington proves to be the guy. So women's basketball, I have some real optimism that they could be a sustainable program. Football, I'm still not super optimistic on, but they've made changes, right? And baseball, we're going to find out. But if they compare NIL and such with the pitches they already have of being the brand and the culture that they have and such, I think they've got a chance too. So I'm not completely doom and gloom about next school year, but this one was just a defining one, and one that should spark change, just like this baseball season needs to spark change, right?
Yeah, Vanderbilt baseball specifically, I think we have to look back at this offseason and say, man, Vanderbilt dominated the portal this year. I think that's what this offseason should be. I don't know that it will, and if it's not, I'd be worried, but I expect the proper changes to be made, and Tim Corbin deserves the opportunity to fix this the way he wants to fix it, the way he feels.
He will too.
Yeah, I mean, all the backhanded cheap shots we've seen, especially on the board in the last couple months, I don't think a lot of them have been warranted. I mean, the guy who gave you 2 national titles, 5 trips to Omaha, 18 straight regionals. right? There's a lot of other SEC programs that haven't ever done that. They don't even have one national title. And so, and I've heard this from a lot of people. He deserves the opportunity to fix this, and he will, and he'll get it righted. And so I don't, I'm not sitting here, worried like it's doomsday for Vanderbilt baseball, but there's some urgency needed in the offseason. And so that's for baseball. Now, in terms of the entire athletic department, Joey, and we'll wrap it up here in a few minutes, I'm not as worried about NIL. I think NIL-wise, Vanderbilt has proven they've got the donors, they've got the money. And, if you think about it, Joey, it hasn't been very often in the last 5-6 months where we have said Vanderbilt's NIL needs to be better. I mean, think about football. They use that for football with a lot of the portal guys they got. Basketball, we heard about the money A.J. Hogarth's getting and some of the other guys as well. So I'm not worried about NIL. Now, maybe there's a certain player down the road that they don't get because they didn't have enough money. But as of right now, I'm not super worried about NIL, the dollars specifically. Mm-hmm. But I am sitting here a little worried about the transfer portal, right? And transfer credits. And can you get a kid in that you want into your program, specifically baseball? Because those are some of the discussions that are going to have to be made, whether it's Diermeyer and Corbin or Lee, whoever makes these decisions on a kid, right? You got to be able to get him into school, And I think Diego Pavia was a good example for football that, we talked about this right away, Joey, that we were a little surprised that a kid like Diego Pavia, no disrespect to him, but he was a JUCO kid, went to New Mexico State, and you just don't see Vanderbilt. I know you're 2-3 years into covering this program, but especially for Chris and I, we're not used to seeing a kid like that get into school, and so for him to do that, I thought was a sign of things to come, and we've seen it with basketball too. To easily run off all these guys, Joe, I mean, that's rare for Vanderbilt. I mean, they got 9 transfers, and those are all guys that I don't know if they were their ones, their twos, their threes, how the staff would sit here and say, but Byington made it look pretty easy, right? And so I'm not saying the transfer credits are an issue, but I think for baseball specifically, they can't be an issue, right? That can't be a long conversation, right? It's got to be easy enough to where if you want a kid, he's getting in, right? So that's what I am slightly worried about. And that's on Vanderbilt. That's on the department to say, okay, we're going to change some things if we want to compete in today's SEC because we're going to have to, right? And so I'm more worried about some of those credits as opposed to NIL, the actual dollars, because I think we've seen that Vanderbilt can get kids in that they haven't gotten in to school in the past. And so I think that's a good thing, but it's got to continue for baseball.
For sure. I want to talk about the portal class and what it needs to look like. Billy, I don't know that they have to completely overhaul the roster. I think they have enough to where if they supplement it with some guys, they could be a really, really good team next year. And that's my point of optimism, is that they don't have to completely change their whole philosophy on it. They have the NIL, they have the brand, all that, right? They just have to be a little more aggressive, and they have to win some recruitments that they haven't won in the past. And that's where I'm at with it. I don't think this has to be – I mean, they have to make changes in some ways, but it doesn't have to be they're never taking a high school guy again or anything like that. They've just got to be a little more apt to the times, and maybe there's some optimism that they can do that. Billy, this is the biggest offseason of Tim Corbin's tenure. Chris has said it, and when he says that, I take some weight in those words. I think this is the offseason that will define what the program looks like in a few years. We know what it has been. We know Tim Corbin's legacy. I don't think that will change. I think he's still going to be one of the best to do it ever. But seeing what this program is in the next 5 years, I think maybe hinges a little bit on this offseason. They can always change it. If they have just a similar year next year, they can do it again, or they can change it next offseason. But I think this is a huge offseason as to where this program goes moving forward. They got to have a good draft. And if they don't have a good draft, then they've got to hit the portal a little bit harder. Huge offseason coming for Tim Corbin. And I think Mark Byington really reshaped things with the men's basketball program with the offseason. I think Shea Ralph has taken a little bit more of a Corbin-like attitude of old, to where they haven't really rebuilt the roster a whole lot. But I think Corbin's got to be somewhere in the middle. I think they've got to get some guys, but they've got to stay true to what they are. And I don't think they're going to lose sight of that. They just have to evolve a little bit. It's not that they have to change everything.
Yeah, a lot of the great coaches have done it before. I mean, we saw Nick Saban adapt and evolve throughout his career. Tim Corbin, he's a baseball lifer. I mean, I think he's got several more years in him as a coach and as the leader of this program. And like I said, he's going to fix it. But at the end of the day, I'm also interested to see. We talk all the time about portal guys. Who's Vandy going to bring in? What's this portal class going to look like? But what are the outgoing players going to look like? Whether it's the draft, but also who hits the portal because they got a good offer somewhere, or who hit the portal because they want to go back home, or who hits the portal because of the trajectory of this program. I think that's a thing to look at. Now, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I would be surprised if if there's a mass exodus for Vanderbilt baseball. I mean, you don't see that, right? You see usually 2 or 3 guys, and a lot of them aren't even heavy contributors. So can they keep the guys that you have to keep, right? And Holcomb, Kojal, right? Guys like that, some of the pitchers. I think that those are a must, right? And then the draft. Like you said, they got to have a good draft, whether it's Dukanich, like that. I think he's a big question mark. Does he end up coming back to Vanderbilt? Futrell, does he end up coming back? Davis Diaz, I think, is kind of an interesting guy there. Does he end up coming back? Yeah, and then the freshmen coming in, right? They got some talent. It's not a loaded recruiting class, but do they avoid the draft there? So that's a good point about the draft, Joey. But ultimately, at the end of the day for this program, things have to change. I like how you said something has to give. If there are no changes this offseason, I don't see next year being much different. Now, it could be slightly better, but I don't see the trajectory making as big of a shift as we expect it to without changes. Whether that's coaching, whether that's impact portal guys coming in, or just an overhaul of mentality, some new ideas, right? I mean, we saw with Clark Lee, credit to him, bringing in a guy like Jerry Kill. Is there a guy from the outside that comes in that you hire, to this staff to try to change some things? I think some of those things have to happen. I'm not going to sit here and say, here's what has to happen. Here's exactly what has to happen. But we know something has to give. And with this being the 3rd straight year of you losing in a regional, I know the 18 straight is big, but it feels like a good time, a good off season to reevaluate things and move forward, right? And I think we need to remember that it's not, the sky isn't falling. This program isn't dead. Tim Corbin hasn't retired, but a reset is needed. And I think everybody can agree on that. But Joey, it's almost 40 minutes here. This has flown by.
What a wrap.
But we'll just have to name this a podcast. But any parting thoughts, whether it's baseball or just the athletic department as a whole, with the year closing down and summer hitting for Mr. Dwyer?
I don't know. What a crazy loss. And that mark goes up there with Presbyterian and UNLV to me. I mean, obviously it's a tournament loss that's a little bit different, but that was emblematic of a lot of the problems they had all year. And for them, I know they're all good guys. It's a shame that it came to light in that way. But I think that could be a wake-up call in some senses for them as they move forward, and a call that they need to evolve and that they need to have a team that they can max out a little bit more. Because I think they did max out this team in the SEC tournament, and maybe they could have done some more in the regional, but I don't know if the ceiling was super high for this team. They now have an opportunity ahead of them, and I think VandySports as a whole has an opportunity ahead of them to change some things as they head into the next school year. And it's going to be a big one for Candace Story-Lee, and it's going to be a big one for all 3 coaches respectively. So we'll be here to cover it all, but I'll be here a little less over the next few weeks as it's summer vacation, Billy. Happy summer. Time to go to the beach.
Yeah.
But I'm sure Vandy fans don't want to hear about that right now. Maybe they'll hear about it in a few weeks, but that was one of the lower points. I don't know the historical context like you or Chris do, but you'd have to think there's not many worse than that in the Tim Corbin era.
No, that's, I mean, me being born in 99, right? He got here in 03. I really didn't start keeping up with the baseball program until around 2010, 2011. But even since then, I think this is one of them. They had a loss, really tragic, after a really tragic situation with Donnie Everett. I'm sure you've heard they lost in a regional at home to Xavier that year, but obviously that was extenuating circumstances. Chris could go back even further. I want to say want to say 06 was a tough year, brutal year for this program. But at the end of the day, for it to end like that was tough. I mean, that's brutal. So you feel for the guys, but also I think it marks a reset that this program needs and this athletic department needs as a whole. Like you mentioned, Joey, and it feels like they've gotten them, at least two of the three, right? Football got a much needed reset. Basketball got a much needed reset. And it feels like they're back to the level of SEC in terms of NIL and portal, at least back to ground level, right? They're not at, the top, but baseball, I think, has their opportunity to do that, and they need to step up to the plate. And they really didn't on the field do that enough this year. We talked all about it. So I'm sure we'll be talking a lot more baseball. It should be a big offseason. I mean, it should be, I don't know if this should be a similar offseason to basketball where, you're looking and you got a guy coming in left and right, but I mean, it should be close, right? This should be a close offseason to that. So we'll see if Corbin and company can do it. But other than that, Joey, we got to wrap this thing up. We'll be, like I said, we'll be keeping track of all the movement in the baseball roster. Basketball guys are on campus. Football guys are on campus. And then before you know it, Joey, we'll be covering some fall camp. So looking forward to that. But that's Joey Dwyer. I'm Billy Derrick. Thanks for checking out another Vandy Sports podcast.